experience as president.
Are you sure, John Hofmeister? I wonder whether, for example, Shell, in the way it's sold to the American public and the wider international world, the notion that exploiting the Alberta tar sands in Canada could be, to quote one of Shell's advertisements, profitable and sustainable. Was that really a credible and trustworthy statement, particularly given the UK Advertising Standards Authority demanded that Shell change that statement because they said it was fundamentally misleading?
Well, I think if you go into the deeper story of the technologies that Shell is deploying in the development of those tar sands, which would be very difficult to do in a simple one-off advertisement, but if you go into the in situ technology that Shell has developed for producing oil in the tar sands, what you see is a sustainable operation, and it will become more so with time. If you also look at the recovery methods, in other words, the requirement to restore the earth in the tar sands to where it was before the excavation took place, again, that's a sustainable opportunity.
But this is a classic piece of greenwash, isn't it? I mean, we know that exploiting those tar sands is one of the dirtiest forms of energy production one can imagine. As I understand it, by 2020, that particular operation will be the biggest single source of industrial emissions in the entire world. It will produce more emissions than the entire nation of Denmark. And you're trying to tell me it's sustainable and responsible?
It is part of a sovereign nation's economic and energy strategy to develop those tar sands. Shell can either participate in that strategic development or not. The world needs energy. I don't think there's any debate anywhere in the world that we need more energy. It's a question of how we go about it.
Shouldn't oil companies and people like yourself who sat at the top of Shell US for 3 years actually take more responsibility, call it moral responsibility if you like, upon your own shoulders?
Absolutely. And you deal with the world in which we live, at the time in which we live, under the conditions that we know, and under the technologies that we have. So, for example, if as a society collectively we agree that personal mobility, individual automobiles, is a way of traveling, then it needs fuel. We don't have technologies yet that replace oil. Certainly Shell was working on, and probably still is, working on the future of hydrogen for vehicles, working on biofuels for vehicles, and there are alternatives coming with respect to batteries, but it's a long way out there. In the meantime, people need oil for mobility.
Well, funnily enough, Shell, and I've been reading their executive reports from recent months, Shell has taken a strategic decision to withdraw from some areas of investment, including wind and solar, which only just a few years ago they were trumpeting. I mean, in the end, oil companies seem to me still determined to get most, if not all, of their profits from exploiting oil. This idea they were going to move beyond petroleum seems to have been abandoned.
Well, Shell never actually had a view that it would move beyond petroleum. It did have a view taken in 1997 of reducing its overall exploitation of petroleum in favor of natural gas.
A new energy future, yeah, a new energy future, I seem to remember, was a Shell slogan. And as I say, in recent months, that slogan seems to have been put back on the shelf.
Well, it tested for years, a decade long, it tested wind and solar. It turns out that solar technology is very much in its infancy, and until the research and development takes place to utilize new forms of materials not yet known through nanotechnology research, I think solar is a long way off in terms of the kinds of efficiency you would want. I think wind is continued by Shell in the United States, perhaps not in other parts of the world, but here's the point. The only way you can operate in wind and solar currently is with government subsidy, otherwise it's not a commercial operation. Government subsidies are being withdrawn given the deficit funding of nation states pretty much throughout the West. And if you don't have a commercial operation, and you are, by necessity, you have to return a dividend and return on investment to your shareholders, you have to make some choices. And I think withdrawing from wind or reducing commit to solar, what have you, are ways in which that could be done.
There are lots of difficult choices to be made and priorities to weigh up. You've and we have alluded several times to the reality of the internal combustion engine, but another reality which surely must be considered by people at the top of the industry is the reality that's represented by news reports like this. The NASA Goddard Institute just last month declaring that 2010 global surface temperatures will hit a new record. Global warming on decadal timescales is continuing without let-up, they say. We see the Arctic ice, again, it seems, this summer being reduced in terms of its coverage at record levels. These are realities. The impact on climate change of the burning of fossil fuels is an urgent priority. And I just wonder how that is factored into the difficult decisions you're talking about.
I write about it extensively in my book. Land, water, and air, all are sacred to us. And we must, in my opinion, and of necessity, hand over to the next generations land, water, and air that is of better quality than we enjoy today. We have to restore the integrity of land, water, and air, which we have dirtied badly in the 20th century and in the beginning of the 21st century. I also include a 50-year roadmap, because nothing in energy space happens quickly. I hear the word urgency, and you're right to use the word urgency, but when it comes to energy, it is not like passing legislation. Legislation happens in parliamentary cycles, or in the U.S., between elections every 2 years, and priorities change every 2 years. I call that political time. You can't make an energy system in a 2-year time frame that's going to yield the kind of results that we need globally. So a 50-year roadmap in which I describe how to transition from a hydrocarbon-based economy to an economy that depends upon and actually pays for the construction of new forms of energy, all things considered. And I don't think even 50 years from now we will completely eliminate the use of coal or oil, but we could greatly reduce it as a part of our energy system, provided we take the tough decisions on nuclear and do far more nuclear. We use far more hydropower, whether that's tidal or current or stored water, like dams. We use hydrogen extensively. We use geothermal.
Well, I'm going to stop you.
There are all kinds of energy
John
sources
Hofmeister,
that we should be developing.
It's an important list you've just made, but I'm going to stop you before you finish it, because as you give me that list, I'm thinking, what is the incentive to put real investment in those alternative energy sources when you've said from the beginning of this interview that the immediate priority has to be keeping oil and fossil fuels affordable? Surely the biggest kickstart to those other alternative energy sources would be actually allowing the real social climate cost of oil to be factored in immediately, make it much more expensive.
And have riots in the streets. I don't think that's a solvable problem. I don't think riots in the streets in a country like